So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fifth and last session of what has been a truly wonderful 2 days of sharing and thinking and learning and listening. We've had this, before we actually start session 5, I'd like to make 2 quick announcements. The first is that for all MLE guests and premium ticket holders, lunch will be in Hall Horta at 11:30 sharp. So all MLE guests and premium ticket holders, lunch in Hall Horta. The second announcement is at the end of this session, we will have a photograph with all workshop presenters and speakers. So please, if those, you know who you are, and if you could make your way as silently as possible to the back of the stage at 11 o'clock. We will still be continuing the session, so it needs to be as silent as possible. So with the logistics out of the way, I'd like to welcome you to session 5, which is about personal commitment and global responsibility. And it's a really wonderful opportunity for our speakers to try and bring together and touch base with many of the ideas we've had. And so I think like many people, I've been taking notes during the different sessions. And some of the things that I've been thinking about and that I've brought into the session today are some of the things that were said in session 1 about the transformative power of nurture and about a call for a century of compassion. We also were reminded of meditative practices and the importance of the power to change yourself and your own behavior. And Grandma Paulina, who so wonderfully reminded us that it's what the eyes see, what the ears hear, what the heart feels. We were also spoken to about power rooted in wisdom and compassion. And we were reminded about the power and the need to reconstruct and to overcome obstacles through power based on wisdom and compassion. These are some of the things that have been coming through, and this morning our 4 speakers will be speaking with His Holiness around their own experiences of personal commitment, global responsibility. And we start with Olafur Eliasson, who is a wonderful person, and all of you will have seen his art hanging and reminding us all through this meeting of the sun and the power of the sun. Olafur is an artist, an innovator, a creator, and someone who's been driving real social change. Olafur.
Thank you, Theo. His Holiness, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having me here. What you see on this picture is a very small solar panel on the roof right above us. It is very much above this sphere which you see up here, so what you see glowing in this sphere is actually the sun shining outside. Thinking about it, it is not a functional light. It's not a pragmatic solution. It is in fact a, should I say, emotional story about the light or the power outside of this room. And as an artist, I believe it is incredibly important to, when talking about the world, to explain it both in functional, pragmatic terms, but also in emotional and non-quantifiable terms. This is how it looks once you are a bit closer. I've been interested in what types of space what type of artwork can in fact host great diversity. This is a sun-like installation. It's a space at the Tate Modern in London, some 10 years ago, in which people were invited in to become a work of art themselves. So instead of suggesting the art is on the wall, or it is on the floor, it is in fact the whole space, and you cannot separate yourself or distinct yourself from what is art and what is not. This allowed people to do all sorts of things, and more than 2 million people came to visit, and many people used this as an opportunity to express themselves, Your Holiness. What was interesting was, in fact, people were sharing the space, acknowledging that they were not having the same experience. The fact that you and I might not fully agree on what we were seeing, but this could, in fact, be an amplifier to our friendship. So in a world where most spaces seem to host polarization or populistic, let's say, arguments which leads to one part having to leave, the spaces of culture, or in this case a work of art, is in fact exercising a methodology where His Holiness and I, we can be together even without having to fully agree on everything, which I think is a great resource. We spoke about the simple things, such as climbing a tree the other day, thanks to Paulina. This is a work of art which is a rainbow. And as we know, with rainbows, His Holiness, where do they come from? Clearly, the sun has a certain role here. In this case, it's a small light again. And water, of course. But do we not also need the eye? So the effort of the eye, we could argue, is in fact what co-creates the rainbow. Looking at a rainbow, we also know scientifically, standing in two different situations, we do not see the same rainbow. So we have the same experience, we have a common language, but by all means we do not theoretically or technically actually see the same rainbow, because the rainbow depends on our eyes. Interestingly, when I show this rainbow, people, they put their hand into the rainbow and they know very well it's water. And then they say, oh, I got wet. And it is as if the mind and the body had not been connected until that very moment when they touched the water. And I say, yes, you touched the water, you got wet. One can translate this idea of the rainbow into a larger, a more architectural, an urban idea, inviting people to actually, should I say, walk in the rainbow or become a rainbow. Walking in the green area, you will have a green world. And what is needed to change the color is, of course, you moving. If you choose to stand still, the color will not change. I worked with natural phenomena, taking things from culture and introducing them into urban settings. This is in New York, a waterfall under the Brooklyn Bridge. Enjoying the water falling is, of course, also about creating a space which we share together. This is a project in Albania and Tirana, not long after Tirana was opened, and I invited the civic society, come and share what it means to build a society. This is Lego bricks, a big table, a sort of city plan. And after a few days, His Holiness, the boy who was selling cigarettes on the street was standing at this table, and the policeman who was normally busy chasing this boy away, he would be at the same table, having a dialogue with his child whether a house or a sort of situation should be like this or like that. Similarly, I have worked over the years with many scientists, with many experimental scientists, mathematicians. I have approached this from a phenomenological point of view, and I, in fact, in the late 90s was very inspired by Francisco Varela. From Francisco, I came to Michel Bitbol and to Evan Thompson through phenomenology into collaborating closely with science. These are the mock-ups at my studio. These are all the experiments. These are the successful and certainly also the failed experiments. Making models of the world is very much about making the world accessible. This is the COP22 in Paris, and as we know, the politicians, the scientists, the people who work with big data, they were gathering, which is very important, of course, but the people on the ground, the common people, the people who feel maybe disconnected with this discussion about the climate. What do I know? It's in Greenland, the ice. It's so far away. Maybe if I show the ice, I thought in Paris, in the center of the city, people would walk up, look at this ice, and they would immediately, just like the rainbow, say, oh, this is ice. And then they would put their hand on it and say, oh, it's cold. And then say, oh yes, it's ice. But this is so interesting, I think, because suddenly they were touching the glacier in Greenland. So we shipped these 220 tons of ice to Paris, proposing the opportunity for people to learn, well, what are they talking about? So in a second, you could get the story, the emotional narrative, the non-quantifiable narrative from the science made accessible to the rest of us. The future, of course, is central here. And there are many ways one can touch ice. And again, I think this is an opportunity to address the fact, when you're dealing with art, we all know there is a situation where, how should I say it? There's a situation where you see, and I should say culture because it could be a theater play, it could be a great book, a film, or a piece of music, or a dance. You look at something and you suddenly go, oh, I know that feeling. This is me. The book is about me. And the book is in fact reflecting a not yet verbalized, a subconscious, emotional need. It is as if this artwork saw me. It spoke on my behalf. It's expressing what I want to say, which means I'm not so bad after all. I'm okay. I'm good enough. I went to a museum, and I did not go to the museum to sort of see art. I came to be seen by the art, by the museum. And I walk out of there and I say, I was reflected, one could say.
Yes.
So, Your Highness, the word inclusion came up yesterday with such great gravity. I think culture has this power of inclusion on many levels. On the caring level, by reflecting people's emotional needs, so people, they see, oh, I'm actually a part of a civic society. I can be a part of civic trust. I worked with combining power and care. I actually have a little work of art with me here, Your Highness. This is a solar panel. And this is the sunlight. Actually, this is the sunlight in Berlin, because I charged it in Berlin 2 days ago. So what I hold in my hand is on one side a pragmatic thing. It's a solar panel, a small battery, and an LED. But on the other side, it is also something that makes me feel connected, interdependent. I feel like I have my own power station. I am powerful, but in a caring way. The reason why I've made an effort, just like with this work of art, to propose that this is, in fact, an emotional thing, it's to suggest that light is not just pragmatic. Light is not just about getting the things done. Light is also about happiness. It's about how I feel, and it's about, well, do my day offer me the opportunity to do non-quantifiable things? Can I have a party? Maybe I can dance. On the picture we see a school class in Rwanda and one school class in Los Angeles, I believe. We have worked very hard to create a language. We worked very hard to create a language which says, well, what is what unites us? How do we feel? And what feelings do we have that we share? We have tried to build an economical model of bringing light to where there's no access to energy. Because about 1 billion people in the world do not have access to energy. Every 1 in 7 persons do not have access to energy, meaning that they are using petroleum or fossil fuels as their primary source, which is very bad for the climate, and it's also very bad for the respiratory conditions. So, inspiringly hearing Theosopha's amazing idea of something which is grown bottom up, something which comes from a messy system, because this is based on selling at the bottom of the pyramid. This is based on selling through everybody sharing a little bit. This is in fact in Nepal, just briefly after the earthquake, where Roshi Halifax courageously got a lot of people together, and they made a huge effort bringing access to energy into places where energy had suddenly collapsed and failed, allowing work to go on into the night and allowing also the comfort of the light at times where there was a lot of darkness. Thank you so much, His Holiness.
Thank you so much, Olafur, for beautifully weaving art and culture into power and care and the ability to actually drive change. Your Holiness, would you like to intervene at the moment, or would you prefer to wait?
It's a beautiful presentation.
As a Buddhist practitioner, the substance is not case.
But it's very different from the scientific presentation, which is driven by data.
Wonderful, really wonderful. I think this shows, see, your sort of brain, something creativity.
Very creative. Yeah.
That's very good. That's very good.
Thank you.
That's all.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So our next panelist, so perhaps Silla and Olafur could change seats. Our next panelist is Silla Elworthy, and she's a social change activist. She's the founder of many, many academic and social change organizations that have focused on research for change, on ethical leadership, on peace activism, and even though I've actually only known her for a day and a half since we came here, it's really clear that she exemplifies the practice of compassion in all of her interactions with people. Silla.
Thank you. Your Holiness, yesterday I decided to discard my PowerPoint. So I asked the technicians to switch it off.
Too much in the PowerPoint. Tears, that PowerPoint watching PowerPoint something. It's like that.
And to talk to you about what I really am passionate about at the moment in terms of personal commitment and global responsibility. For the past 40 years, my work has involved me spending hundreds, thousands of hours listening and talking to those who have a great deal of power over nuclear weapons. That means those who design the warheads in the laboratories, those who strategize to deploy the weapons, the military, the intelligence community who give the rationale for the weapons, and the people who sign the checks, as well as the political leaders who have the terrible responsibility of their finger on the trigger. And listening to them, I discovered that, and this is people in all the nuclear weapons nations, my own country, the UK, France, China, the United States, the then Soviet Union, now Russia, India, Pakistan, and Israel. I've never talked to anybody from North Korea yet. And in 2001, I started to work at the other end, at the grassroots, with people who risk their lives daily so that other people don't get killed in areas of hot conflict, like Colombia, the Congo, Zimbabwe, Sri Lanka, Nepal, northwest Pakistan. And what I discovered is that these people and the research community that I work in and the military as well know so much now about how to prevent war that we do not need weaponry anymore. Especially because the threats that we talked about yesterday, the threats that humanity has brought about, climate change, migration, terrorism even, and the rich-poor gap that you spoke about yesterday, these threats do not respond to weapons. So this is perhaps an evolutionary moment, a challenge for human beings to upgrade our consciousness and our way of preventing war. I'm not talking about conflict, because conflict is just energy. It's not good, not bad. But we're talking about the destructiveness, the terrible legacy, the debris of war. So what I'm doing now with my colleagues is to put together a plan at the local level, at the national level, and at the international level of what people can do, ordinary people and, in quotes, powerful people, what we can actually do to prevent war. Thank you. And so we have started by laying out what it is that makes war continue. Not just the military-industrial complex that everybody speaks about, who obviously make a fortune from weaponry, but also those who are comfortable with a war situation because it means they can traffic weapons, drugs, money. So war continuing is in their interests, and we have to really recognize this. If we're going to deal with violence of this extremity, we have to understand how people who are invested in war, how they think. And that's why I'm so interested in listening to them and talking with them. In fact, we've organized over 25 years dialogues in Oxford, in Beijing, in New Delhi, in Geneva and Moscow, where we have brought together these decision makers, with their informed critics. So people who were in the business of making weapons and stepped out, who know the details. And after 5 years, we decided to invite meditators to sit in the next room or in the room below and meditate all day while these discussions were going on. I can just tell you one story that happened. On the second day of the first time we did this, a man from the US State Department came to me because we were meeting in a beautiful beamed hall, and underneath was the library where the meditators were sitting. And he said to me, referring to this beautiful hall, he said, "This is a very special room, Sela." And I said, "Yes, it was built in 1360. It's a very special room." And he said, no, it's very special. And I said, "Well, people have been doing yoga in this room and meditating and so on." He said, no, there's something coming through the floorboards. And so I said to him, "Yes, would you like to know what it is?" He said, "Yes." And I told him, and he went white in his face. And I said, "Would you like to talk to the people who are meditating?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, they're the older people who serve you your lunch. So please ask them at lunchtime." And at lunch, he came back smiling. And he just winked at me and said, "Okay, I get it." I tell you. So now what we're doing is to, with my colleagues, is to put together a costed business plan for peace. As far as I know, such a thing has never existed. We know a lot about how much weapons cost, but not so much about the detail of what it costs to prevent war. The last time I did this study, I found that the on-the-ground prevention of war methods, the grassroots, cost, what is spent on that is $1 for every $1,885 spent on the weaponry required for war. And the latest information I can give you, and as I say, this study is just halfway through, is given by the Global Peace Index, the Institute for Economics and Peace in Australia. And they say that the economic impact of armed violence on the global economy is $13 trillion. And as far as we can work it out, in the first study of the costed business plan for peace, a business plan for peace would cost $1.7 trillion. So 1/10 of what war would cost to do this effectively and efficiently. And I can just conclude by giving some quick examples of what people can do. Ordinary people can insist that their children are taught to meditate at school. Because And what we can do on the larger scene is at national level, we can, or those people who live in countries of conflict, can insist that their governments build an infrastructure for peace, which is what Nelson Mandela invented when he came out of jail. A structure which has a national peace council, a regional, city and village peace council. And on those councils are the respected individuals from the community. And their job is to make a peace plan for that community. And that costs only $2 million to set that up for a whole country. So those are just two examples of the kind of very practical things that we're including. And I'll pause there.
Thank you so much, Sila. Your Holiness, would you have any words or would you prefer to read?
Certainly, I appreciate. I want to share or inform to the audience and also Kasachukti panelists. I think 2 years ago, or last year, no, I can't remember now, there's one Nobel Peace Laureate. Originally, one meeting planned in Cape Town. Then, South African government refused give me visa. So then, in order to show solidarity, other Nobel laureates also then refused to go to there. Then finally shift to Rome. So there, one sort of, among the Nobel laureate, there are some organization also there.
Representative.
Who is working for reduce or banning nuclear weapon. So there, the expert, a truly expert, is explain if nuclear war take place, then they call Kasa nuclear auto, the window or something.
Nuclear holocaust, yeah, winter.
Then we listen terribly. So this information makes available to
everybody,
humanity level. Then certainly, if you feel something, nuclear war is unthinkable. So then I sort of suggested, now just express anti-nuclear weapon. It's not sufficient. Now we should have timetable. Within 2 years, this world should be free of nuclear weapon. led by Nobel laureate, and I think worldwide some kind of movement. Fix the timetable, make clear. Then everywhere, I think mass movements. Then I think some result might happen. Otherwise, just to express, and some people, some demonstrate, not worldwide, mobilize. There's not much sort of effect. I think from Japan, I think the Japanese people totally against nuclear weapon. I think Japan, I think we can easily mobilize some kind of mass movement. Then I think European continent, I think maybe easier.
More receptive. More receptive.
Then American people, as a people, certainly. So unless that kind of movement, just almost like prayer or nuclear free, because of
nuclear free world.
Nuclear free world, just like prayer. Not much effect. So I think people sort of say a non-violent, this non-violent way, simply, and with full explanation, consequences of this awful weapon, make known everybody, and meantime, some kind of sort of mobilization, a timetable, not just because of wishful thinking way.
Not just an aspiration. Yeah.
So then at that meeting, when I request or suggest, everybody, you see, looks to see full agreement. But nothing happened. So yesterday, the William
Williams,
also there. So yesterday, I also felt that I want to remind her, but then no time, so like that. So I think we should, some organization, some individual, I think like you, I think should start.
Take the lead, yeah.
And then suggest different organization, then eventually United Nations or this government. So that's just, I felt.
The people need to make it possible impossible for the politicians not to act.
I think at least that's all. Did it. At least you see the free country, democratic country, I think public strong voice you see express. I think they will listen. And then I think firstly America, most powerful nuclear sort of weapon. So America, I think they proudly start that kind of movement. Then pointing to Russia and China. And North Korea, sometimes it's difficult too. I think they are really lagging common sense. So I don't know. But in any way, I think a major nation who have the nuclear weapon, I think they unanimously, eventually, compelled to do something. I think then possible that this world can be free
of nuclear weapons.
Then the second step, the offensive weapon, eventually, reduce. I have since many years, I have the dream, the Franco-German unified force.
Yeah.
Now the latest information, I don't know what happened. But one time, it's a unified force. So that kind of practice, first level, the member of European Union, each individual nation demilitarized, but some kind of a unified force. That similar sort of pattern of practice in other country and Africa also. I really because of the praying or wish the pan-African sort of concept. Small individual, independent, sovereign, and killing each other, and within one nation, civil war. It's useless, senseless. So unified, and then each country of that sort of, because of the union, demilitarized. So, step by step, and then eventually, our planet, 7 billion human beings, I think, demilitarized the world. Then, I think possible. Now, through education, through awareness, through some kind of the effort, I think possible. And in the meantime, education. After all, what they use? War. War means destruction. Bring more suffering, more pain. I believe human common sense and human basic nature. As I mentioned yesterday, basic human nature is more compassionate. Therefore, I think possible to achieve that. So now we need some organization, some individual start work.
Thank you.
And also, you artist, through artistic way, you see, please inform people how serious
Exactly.
war, killing human beings. War means killing human beings.
Exactly.
And then, particularly use these weapons, which is tremendous destructive power. As you mentioned, firstly, waste of money.
Total waste of money.
And I think those brilliant scientists and technologists, I think their ability, meant for killing. So bad.
They could be designing things that make life better for people.
Right. So therefore, that's one of my dream or wish since many years. So I just expressed that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now our third panelist is Frédéric Laloux. And Frédéric is a creator and a facilitator of new and different and innovative ways for us to work together in non-hierarchical manner. He's an advisor in new organizational structures. Frédéric.
Thank you. Your Holiness, I will speak about power and care in organizations, in the places in which most of us work every day in businesses, in non-profits, in schools, in hospitals. And over the last 2 days, we've spoken about a new way to hold power and care that seems to be emerging in the world right now. And I've been interested to see what could that mean very practically. How could that change the organizations in which we work? Because I don't know to what degree you're familiar with this, but everywhere, at least in the Western world, people are increasingly disillusioned with the places they work. More and more managers are leaving their businesses. More and more. More and more nurses and doctors are leaving hospitals. Teachers are leaving their schools because the places they work and the way power is held there hurts their integrity, feels inhospitable to the longings of their soul. And I believe that in many ways that is a good sign. I think we see an old system that is dying and a new system that is starting to emerge. And actually quite a lot of psychologists and philosophers have written about this new consciousness that is emerging. People like Robert Keegan at Harvard and Jenny Wade and philosophers like Ken Wilber. So we know what is emerging on an individual level as people grow into new ways of looking at the world. And I've been interested to look at, okay, but what then happens in organizations? So I've been researching really extraordinary organizations that have been founded or led by people who have done some inner work, sometimes some spiritual development, and from this new perspective felt that the way we normally structure and run organizations just didn't feel right for them. The way we're told we should exercise power in organization doesn't feel right for them. And so they went on an incredible and so they started experimenting like crazy. Really throwing out everything we're being told in business school. And what was fascinating for me was that after much experimentation, what they ended up with, even though they often thought they were the only ones doing this, was remarkably similar. So it seems that there's like something in the air that different people catch at the same time about new possibilities to structure and run organizations. And I've looked at a great number of organizations, and then I decided I would study in depth organizations, whatever their industry, whatever their geography. But they needed to be at least a bit large, at least 100 employees. And for at least 5 years, they should have been operating along these new principles, along this new consciousness that the psychologists write about. And to my great surprise and delight, I found a number of organizations that had not only a few hundred people, but some organizations had a few thousand people, or more than 10,000 people, very large organizations that were already operating with radically new ways to hold power and care. And some of them had been operating like this for 10, 20, 30, 40 years in all sorts of sectors and industries. And really, these organizations are very, very different. We have to wrap our mind around how they operate. And one of the big differences is that they have a different metaphor to to talk about the organization. In our current scientific materialist paradigm, people talk about organizations like a machine. Actually, we talk about everything like a machine. The human body is a machine, the world is a machine. And very consistently, these new organizations use a different image. They say, no, we are a living organism. Our organization is like a living being. And that change of image has very profound implications. And it comes with, I believe, at least 3 fundamental breakthroughs. And the first one is that so far, we always believed that to run an organization, we needed a pyramid. A boss and then layers of hierarchy. That's the way that power works in an organization. And what we see emerging now is organizations of thousands of people that operate in self-organizing ways, entirely without levels of hierarchy, entirely without anyone being the boss of anyone else and anyone else being subordinate. And that sounds crazy, right? I mean, that's not possible. You cannot have thousands of people in an organization. Come on, at some point you need a boss. That sounds crazy. That sounds crazy until you realize that actually the most complex systems in the world, which are natural systems, have been operating like this for billions of years. Right? The human brain with 85 billion cells, or just any one cell, or a complex ecosystem like a forest, operates in self-organizing manner. And what is extraordinary, I think, at this time in history is that different people are understanding at the same time how to import these principles that operated in nature for billions of years, how to bring them into our organizations. And that changes the nature of power radically. It's no longer power over, it's interconnected power, it's power with. And the fascinating thing is there are enough of these organizations out there for us to actually know very practically how this works. This is no longer a mystery. We know, sort of like with acupuncture points, what are the structures and processes that need to be different for this to work. So we now know, okay, no pyramid, so what is the structure? Not top-down decision-making, also, by the way, no consensus, no endless discussion. But we know how to make decisions in these. We know how to do very practical things. If there's conflict, but there's no boss. If there's conflict, but there's no boss, how do we deal with it? We now know how to do this. Who gets a pay raise at the end of the year? Very practical questions. We know how to do this. And a group of dozens of volunteers is building, by the way, a wiki that details all of these with practical examples. A second breakthrough is maybe best understood by those people who have a bit of a spiritual perspective. And that is that all wisdom traditions in some ways say that there's really 2 ways to look at the world. We can approach the world from a place of fear and separation and scarcity, or we can approach the world from a place of love and connection and abundance. And in most organizations, because there's subtle fears in these organizations, we felt that it's actually safe to be separated. It's actually safe to wear a mask, to not show our deepest concerns and longings. And what some of these organizations I have researched have found is when we show up behind a mask, only showing a small part that feels safe, that feels acceptable, we're also only showing a very small part of our energy, of our creativity, of our passion. And so there are some organizations out there who look at work as a place to live into wholeness. They've found ways, which some spiritual traditions have known for thousands of years, to create a safe space where it feels safe enough to show up with all of who we are, to actually discover who we are, in a way that is incredibly caring. There's some organizations, like 3 different organizations, where I heard people say something like, you know, sometimes I wish my home was more like my work. Because there's so much care, because we've created consciously a safe container. And again, we know how to do this. There's a number of different things that we need to upgrade. Starting, for those who know the term, with all of the basic HR processes. Because those is typically the place where fear starts, in recruitment and yearly evaluations and these things. And the third breakthrough has to do with purpose and how we look at the future. In today's machine view, we need to predict and control the world. Right? And we have tools in organizations. We make strategic plans and 5-year plans and then yearly budgets and then targets so that we know where we're going, we predict and control the future. And what some of these people in these organizations say is that no longer makes sense to us. We believe that the organization isn't a lifeless machine that we need to program. It's a living organism that has its own sense of destiny, its own energy, its own thing it wants to manifest in the world. And so our role as leaders is much humbler. It's actually simply to listen to where does this organization want to go, and to go with it. And some people call that, we just sense into purpose. We listen into what does this organization want to do. And again, it changes a number of things. For instance, none of the organizations I researched, all of which are spectacularly successful, has a strategic plan. And that sounds crazy, but they have different ways to listen to where does this organization want to go. And so again, we kind of know now how to do this. So this is what I briefly wanted to share with you, is that as there's a new consciousness emerging in the world, there is very practical ways to shift to a new way to bring power and care into organizations. That brings radically more life, more power, more purpose, more meaning. And this isn't a theory, this isn't a model, this is real stuff that exists out there, and more are popping up. So if we know where to look, we can already see the new emerging. And I feel this is a message of hope for all of us, and everyone here in the room who is leading, participating in an organization, a school, a business, a hospital, that if something hurts your integrity, hurts your soul in the way we run things, there is inspiration out there for you to look for how to do things differently. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Your Holiness, before I ask for your intervention, could I ask Frederick just to give us one practical example that you've worked with?
Yeah, there are many. Because we're in Belgium, it's such a beautiful example. There's one next door in the Netherlands. And it's a home care organization, so nurses that don't work in a hospital but go to the home, often of old people. And it's such an interesting story because it shows how we traditionally, the machine way to think about this, and then the living organism. In the 1980s, the machine way to think about management took over in Holland. And the state said, you know, in order to make savings, let's force all the nurses that worked independently to be together in organizations. And we'll have economies of scale. So they forced the nurses to go into large organizations. And then a whole logic took over. They started... They started saying, oh, but the nurses still have their personal clients, and that makes it difficult to fill their days. Sometimes they have holes where they get paid to wait for a client. So they created a call center, took away the phones from the nurses, and had a new system where clients didn't have their personal nurse, but just depending on which nurse was free and close by, they could just send whatever nurse. And then they realized that the more experienced nurses, you have to pay them more. So let them do only the complicated stuff. And all the rest we give to cheap nurses out of school. And then they realized some nurses are faster than others. So let's define times. So giving a shower is 15 minutes, giving a shot is 10 minutes. Changing a compression stocking is 2.5 minutes. And then they said, oh, but this is great, now we can do planning. And so next to the call center, they created a planning department. And now a nurse gets a sheet of paper that says, you start at 8 o'clock, you change your compression stocking, you're out again at 8:02. Google Map calculates it takes 6 minutes to drive to the next client. And then you have a shot 10 minutes. And then they said, oh, this is great, now we can do continuous improvement. And they asked the nurses to put barcode stickers in front of the doors. And they have to scan in when they go in and out. And now the managers can look at all this data and say, you know what? It's with showers that you always lose 1 or 2 minutes. So let us train you on how to give more efficient showers. And that all makes sense from the machine paradigm. Why would you not do it? It makes the thing cheaper, so we can help more people. And in the middle of this, of course, clients and nurses hated it. You have to imagine, as often an old person, somewhat confused. You see a new nurse coming in every day, you have to re-explain everything. The nurse looks and, oh, you need a shot. And then the client says, no, yeah, but I called the doctor, it has changed a little bit. I'm sorry, I have no time. And you go on. And it hurts the nurses deeply in their integrity. Because they often know they do bad work, but they have no time. And in the middle of all this is one of these nurses, Jos de Blok, who said, I cannot take this. And he created Buurtzorg. In the beginning, 4 people, and he simply said, the purpose for me is not to give efficient shots, is for patients to lead rich and autonomous lives. And so a nurse at Buurtzorg takes time takes time to sit down, drink coffee with the old person and says, what is it that you can still do in life? What is it you no longer can do? Oh, you have children that could help you, but they don't help you because you don't get along. Maybe I can help you reestablish dialogue. They do incredibly beautiful things. They go back to a model where one person just sees one or two nurses and they develop a beautiful, deep, caring relationship. And the result of that is that Bozar 10 years ago was founded with 4 people. There are 14,000 now. Because all the nurses want to work for them. They receive 250 CVs. Can we please work for you? They went from 0 to, I think now it changes so quickly, 70-75% market share. And the most interesting thing is that there's been some financial studies, because you can say, of course it's easy to give good care if you drink coffee, but we're trying to get every minute. But they found that Bozar only uses 40% of the hours prescribed by doctors because patients become autonomous so much faster. So a total paradox. As compared to these other organizations who try to squeeze every minute out of it, if you drink coffee, you're actually saving the Dutch state hundreds of millions of euros every year. And very quickly, Bozar 14,000 nurses, all organized in teams of 10 to 12 nurses. There is no team leader. They have a tiny headquarters of 25 people for 14,000. There's no head of finance, no head of HR, no head of marketing. There's no marketing. And it would take me too long to explain you how it works, but they're just incredibly efficient and incredibly caring, including among the nurses. So nurses will help each other out. When they encounter deep problems of, I have this patient in terminal care and it reminds me of my own mother dying and I'm not sure I can handle this. Nurses will help each other out and they have formats to do this in ways that are just marvelous. So just to give you, I hope, a glimpse, a sense. And the fascinating thing is the nurses are the same, the syringes, the bandages are the same. The only thing that changes is how we view the world. Right? I take this not as credit for me, but as credit for these 14,000 nurses and all of these innovators out there. I simply describe what I see, but they're the ones who are catching what is in the air.
Thank you so much, Frederick. Your Holiness, would you like to say anything?
Oh, I just really the expert 직송인 줄 하려고.
Very impressed when an expert describes these kind of processes.
I think time always moving. I think basically, time always moving. So, any organization, including religious organization. I think when they start, I feel the society more or less the feudal system. So that means for kings or queens, the top, and even religious person, top, and then go like that. So democratic system, different way. So many are sort of organization. I think people have some kind of sort of impression, authoritarian, controlled by one person, more efficient.
Effective Lama.
That kind of sort of impression there. So this is actually against the basic human nature. So you see because of your experiment, your work, I think wonderful, wonderful. Then at the same time, I'm a little sort of skeptical. I think 7 billion human beings, different brain, with that, different experience or different wish or different sort of thinking. So,
so it would be almost impossible to create systems where every participant in that organization is going to be totally happy.
That's human nature, I think human nature. Some complaint here and there, I think almost nature, human nature. So that was the I think maybe my sort of way of thinking is some kind of the Buddhist philosophy. There is no absolute. Everything interrelated.
That is. So, of course, in a lot of these organizational structures, when we are talking about, we have to take into account the relative context in which they are operating. There's no such thing as the absolute, the best system.
But I really, congratulations, is not contented existing sort of system. And try to make change, improvement. Most welcome.
So, actually, Frederick, you brought this right back to the beginning for us, because sometimes we're not quite sure how it will wrap up. But by ending by saying that what changed was the view of the world, and because of that change of view, the system actually changed. So Oliver, I wanted to come back to you about the power of art to change people's views of the world, and what your experience of that has been.
Well, I think that art has this ability to allow you both to be involved with critique, and in the process of that also to be self-critical or reflect upon your own potential. And as I was saying, that good art or great art informs us, but really fantastic art, it listens to us. And this is why it's so important to, I think, see that culture is really the pillars, one of the pillars of our societies. And it offers so many methodologies through which we can examine, well, do we actually translate the values we have into action? So making art and experiencing art very much has to do with questioning, well, am I connected to the world? Do I feel interdependent? When I make a drawing and it is successful, I can feel that that little pencil on the paper is in fact pushing the world. Not a lot, but I can feel it. I feel connected. When the drawing is not so focused, I feel disconnected. When experiencing a work of art, and this I think is the caring component, you sometimes realize, oh, as I said before, this is how I feel. Now I see myself in a bigger context. And there is a practical application to this when you are a part of a cultural festival. You're suddenly in a situation where expressing views, being together and disagreeing, hosting a space which in fact has a conflict, disagreement under the safe haven of culture, and it teaches us, well, in fact, we do not need to throw one out just because this or that person disagrees. Maybe disagreeing can even be a quality, an amplifier of the quality. So unlike, as I said, the political sector, I think the cultural sector has a lot of spaces where parliamentary exercises are done with greater success. So one could see as art being contributing to society, or culture, of course, in this way. But we also have to see that there are artists in all communities. There are practitioners out there putting effort into teaching, into working with children, and essentially telling people, well, some things are hard to verbalize. Let's have confidence in the emotional language that art actually offers us. Because I don't think art is something solidified. I would say art is a language. And of course we need to learn how to speak that language, but essentially what gives art quality is not how we make it, but what we say with art.
Okay, thank you. So, just for reassurance, we haven't forgotten Tanya, but she has a special role towards the end of this. But as we are getting towards the end, because this is the panel on personal commitment and global responsibility, I would actually like to ask each of the panelists, having been here for 2 days and listened to the science, the social research, the ethical discussions, 2 questions for each of you. What will you take away in terms of your own personal commitment in relation to the global responsibility that we've been talking about for change? And what would you hope that members of the audience, all of the people who've taken part in this, might take away? So perhaps we'll go backwards and start with Frederick, go to Silla, and come to Olafur.
Frankly, I wonder if it's not too early because I'm still digesting. But I think one thing that stuck out for me is that this whole distinction of the powerful and the powerless makes sense at some level. There are really structural imbalances. And at another level, it really doesn't make any sense. Right? And we've seen some beautiful examples yesterday. Jodie doing incredible work. And I don't know what her background was, but she just stepped up at some point. Or the example I just gave you of Jos de Blok, the nurse. There were a few 10,000 nurses in the Netherlands. And, here's one that steps up and suddenly changes the game. And so I think that will stay with me as a new way to look at the world of, there are structural imbalances and let's not negate them. But I will look differently at each of us that normally feel powerless, and I think it's also a call for action for me of what is it that I feel called to do, and how scary would it be to really step into my own power?
And for the people who've been on this journey with us?
Sorry?
And for the people who've been on this journey with us for these 2 days?
I think I would offer just the same, because that's what's on my mind is, what prevents each of us, what prevents each of you. Like, I think if we are here is because we hear some voice that is different from the mainstream voice. And very often I think we feel powerless and we go back to our day-to-day work. And what would it take for each of you and me to actually act on that, like this nurse did, or like Jodie did? And how beautiful and scary and wonderful would it be to step into your power?
Thank you.
Silla. Well, what I take away from this gathering is the evident power of the feminine. In men as in women. I hear it in the conversations everywhere. I see it in people's faces. And the question I ask myself is, how do we, together, provide everyone, not just everyone in this wonderful room, gathered in an incredible way, how do we provide all the millions out there with actual practical things that everybody can do to make this world a more peaceful place? I have a question for His Holiness, and I would like to ask him how he sees the feminine principle, the yin, how that can be brought back into balance with the masculine, the yang. Because at present, not in this room, but in the world, they are out of balance.
The balance, the kind of and the kind of then you may have to want to top of the power. The new power that can balance the Lapsha career as the one can be. There's something we wanted to get you share.
I always consider ultimately their love, compassion. I think that I feel the key factor. And then I think other day I mentioned the love and compassion, not the kind of mixed with attachment, not that way, but genuine sort of also the sense of concern of other. So that sense of concern of others' well-being is not oriented about others' attitude towards you, but simply the others also like me want happy life, do not want suffering, and have the right, like I have the right to achieve happy life. So on that sort of understanding or recognition, then develop sense of concern. So that kind of because the compassionate attitude can reach your enemy also. So, and then I think everybody or every sentient being loves himself or herself. Not because I am very, very kind to myself. No. Simply I want a happy life. Don't want suffering. On that basis, we develop self-cherishing. So it's 100% the same. Oh, everybody, also insects, fish, all these, also you have that feeling. I want happy. I do not want suffering. So everyone have right. No related with something kind to me, so I extend my love. That's biased. We human beings, we have the ability. Animals cannot do that. We have the ability because of our intelligence. So, after all, it's quite simple. Because we take care of oneself, then more compassionate sort of thinking, take care about other, you get maximum benefit. The more you think yourself and narrow-minded, or self-centered attitude, you get more trouble, more problem. That's reality. The animal cannot think that. We have the ability to think that, irrespective of whether religious believer or non-believer, or believe next life or not, doesn't matter. Everyone wants a happy life. And then each individual's life very much depends on the society. And the society very much depends on the whole world, humanity. So ultimately, for your own interest, you have to take serious thinking, right? Concern about well-being of our whole world. So that, I always think the education. And I think this education also is a touch. You see, as a modern education, say, start or develop with the industrial revolution.
Industrial revolution.
So the education very much related with the matters. So human mind, not like a machine, something much complicated. So I think our education should have according basic human sort of nature of our mind. I feel like that. But if you ask how start, then my answer is I don't know. So that's why you see, I ask some experts, please make some kind of drafting. Curriculum draft. I don't know. I feel, you see, education, through education, you see, we can also expand our awareness deeper and larger. As I mentioned earlier, existing modern education is along with industrialization, so much sort of related or oriented about material value, external value. So then power has to come. Actually, I think we so familiar. You see, these some I think one-sided sort of impression. So when we say power, it's immediately you see because of reflected some kind of control or something like that. No, the power is something because of that more efficient or more effective. So that both positive and negative and even neutral, like that. So I think we need a lot of research work. As the specialist, you see, you carry a lot of research, so your presentation is very precise, remarkable. But this, if may I say so, you see, your sort of presentation, you see, these experts' presentation is part of human thing, not whole. And question of peace and war, also you see, they part of human sort of business. But human, in the terms of 7 billion beings, there are a lot of things there. Ultimately, emotion. Real troublemaker is among the emotion. And also the kasura, a special sort of ability of human being, that also related with our emotion and intelligence. So quite complicated. When we look things so complicated and so much problem, then better to pray, end of the world, please come soon. That also silly. I think we human beings, I think we only human being can, you see, develop the infinite altruism. It takes care not only ourselves but others, and also because of the trillions of different species of mammal and environment itself. I think we only human being can do. So human life is precious. So then it is really worthwhile to
protect it.
To protect the human being. I don't know. But in any way, my age now, 81 years old, is next perhaps 15, 20 years. Then no longer there, so I don't need much worry. You, younger, so you have to look more seriously because you live another 30, 40 years. I think you and me maybe go.
Thank you, Your Holiness.
So I really impress the audience. I think really have to seriously pay attention and accordingly sort of response. I think hardly no one sleeping. Maybe some remote corner, maybe. Otherwise, everybody is very much so attentive. Attentive. So now, as yesterday I mentioned, this is not because of the talking about a story or something. No. We are talking something concerned about humanity. So each of us have some sort of opportunity to make some contribution and use one's own different professions and how to make contribution through your own profession and to achieve happier humanity, peaceful world.
Thank you so much, Your Holiness. And I'd also like to thank our three panelists this morning for giving us so much amazing information and so much to go away with. And I'd like to hand over now to Tanya to actually bring all of this together in closing the conference. And just before I ask you to speak, please, workshop presenters and speakers, as quietly as possible to the back so that you have the opportunity of the final photograph. Tanya.
Yes.
So His Holiness, presenters, friends, audience, it's now the time to close these 3 days. And I have the honor to wrap it up and especially to practice gratitude and to practice a spiritual practice of thankfulness, which actually, from science, we know it's emerging from the same biological, psychological system than compassion, loving kindness, and care. So gratitude is always a wonderful practice, and I think we all pour out of gratitude. But before that, I wanted to try to kind of, if at all possible, integrate a little bit what we have heard the 3 days. And when I was thinking, how can I possibly integrate ever the richness and multiplicity of voices we heard, I had actually this image coming to mind of the sphere of Olafur Eliasson's team hanging here and illuminating our minds for 3 days. Because if you look at the sphere closely, it is consisting of a lot of little triangles which are glass mirrors. And so they are mirroring light and perspectives to each other. And you could think the sphere is just an addition of a lot of little parts, different separate parts. But if you look at it as a whole, it is a unity. It is a gestalt, it is an art piece, it is a sun, which is empowered by our wheel sun coming here into. So it is almost like an image or a metaphor, I think, of what we lived here together 3 days, where we had all these particles, this perspective, starting evolutionary, anthropology, diving into the hormones, very micro level of, oxytocin and all these very low level microcosmic aspects, and then diving back a little bit to psychology, to the clinical application, then diving up again to the macro level, of the big human questions of, values, and how can we bring about a harmonious, balanced life across religion and also non-religious people and, pre-religious spiritual tradition. We heard the perspectives and facets and voices like a kaleidoscope of politicians, of economists who actually talk like psychologists. I was like, oh, they're taking away our professions now. Starting talking about psychology. And then we kind of, heard today how the perspective of art and the perspective, of real activism, of political implication, of doing on the ground, and how governance system can be changed. So I think it is just the starting point of this complex sphere where we just exchange these perspectives. And if I would now put all the perspectives sitting here, 2,000 different perspectives all in this ball, we would start getting at the complexity we are facing in our nowadays world. But I also thought that these 3 days seem to be a model of how our future world could look like, that we listening to this heterogeneity of perspective of different ways. Some have data, some have just hard quality coming out, and really listening to what we have to say and come out of our silos of discipline we are very often trapped in. I can tell you the silo of science is sometimes a bit narrow. But I also experienced, silos of art, the silo of nearly each discipline its own perspective narrative. And how beautiful is it if we go out and just listen to others' perspective and just allow this to be there. When I also try to look at the kaleidoscope, all these facets, what is a common theme we heard? I think it started with a clear understanding that we are not doing an academic dialogue here, but that we are here because we face real problems, urgent problems. And the presentation of Röckström, I think in a most clear scientific way, showed us the facts that only in 20 years or 30 years in the life of Anthropocene, or the area of Anthropocene, we humans really managed to destroy the very planet we are living from. And I think Pauline Tangieri brought these scientific facts into all the hearts of us. She was speaking almost from Mother Earth, talking to us. This was my feeling. And we also heard from the economists that we have, problems to face, like poverty in the midst of plenty, increasing inequality gap, always richer people, but bigger difference between poor and rich in very rich countries. On the individual level, we face a crisis of disconnection, of isolation of perceived loneliness, even though we are very connected through the internet. The subjective feeling very often is stress and isolation and overburdening of an ego inflation. So we saw all these, and I think we all agree that we can't deny that. But on the other hand, there was a topic through this kaleidoscope running, which was the message of hope. And this was actually an even stronger message. And we heard the concept of change and of plasticity. So we heard how actually we are equipped with all these motives, power, care, selfishness, altruism, achievement. And now it is really up to us to balance these motives and impulses out in a balanced fashion. So I think we heard Jody Williams and also His Holiness saying many, many times, it's our responsibility. We have to step into our individual responsibility and our power to care. And I think this message, I heard it again and again, and also examples that this is possible on all levels. So I reflected, Gandhi once said, you have to be the change you want to see in the world. There is no other way. You can't put responsibility on politicians, on the planet, on whatever. We also heard you can give away responsibility on holiness, on priests. That will not do the job. We also talked about the influence of media and press, and I was reflecting that I know from some of you, I know that there are 40 people here sitting who reflect media and the press. And I was imagining what a power if these 40 people start, instead of what the media at the moment do most, is to write about alarm system, panic, fear, polarization, segregation. If the press, the media would start writing in articles about the power of care, altruism, and that this would be as fashionable as writing about the last bomb explosion or murder in a household. This is very, very powerful, and at the end it only needs journalists writing about it, because the facts are there anyway. So that's just one example. I have talked to so many of you as much as I could in the breaks. So many of you are educators and want to implement these practices. Just do it. Please. And, I could go on and on to cite Theo. It's not only our working place. All of you who are working day and night to care about children, about, relatives, sick relatives. This is really the workplace you are in, and where we can all kind of, I have to walk my talks every day as a boss, and I completely agree with Frédéric. This hierarchical system doesn't work, also not for the bosses. So it's really about, perhaps when we have a minute of silence after this conference, we all go inside and see how we can, in our sphere of power, in our local expertise we have, we can actually put an intention into the power of care. And I think if we all do that together, we create a magic field at the 3 days, and we can actually achieve the dream and the vision His Holiness has put out on the first day, that we move into a century of compassion. Because also citing His Holiness on another time, you said once, compassion is not a luxury anymore, it is a necessity. So I want to end with these words and then start thanking, and really thanking from my heart in the name, of Mind and Life Europe, all the people who have been here, all the panelists, and also the workshop holders. Because this time, for the first time, we tried to not only talk intellectually, but provide first-person experience, like Francisco Varela had the vision at the beginning of Mind and Life, to bring together third-person science with first-person inner experience, and to match these two forces into one. And I think the workshops and also the piano concert, the puppet concert, and the art piece surrounding us helps us integrating this. So thank you for all these workshop holders coming here. And I also want to thank all the people in black with these beautiful orange things, Charles. They are sitting for all the These are like 47 volunteers who gave their time and came here to make and to host and to care for you and for us. Even they came from Berlin, I see them sitting there. And so this is a real big gratitude. And then, of course, 3 names I specifically want to mention because they were really working for many years sometimes, and especially months. In the last months, it is Cornelius Pitzner. He will come on stage, I guess. There are numerous people, but also Caroline and Ilios, who have really helped in Brussels organize all this. And then, in addition to the content committee who is responsible now, I would also like to thank Diego, because he was at the beginning of this Power and Care conference some years ago. And for Arthur Vajong, the former president of Mind and Life International, who is also sitting here and really encouraged us to bring female power here. And now I guess it is time to wish all the people coming on stage, all the workshop holders, the board of Mind and Life, Amy Varela, who is the chair of the board of Mind and Life Europe, and for the final ceremony.
Ngân thấy gì vậy? 야, 이거 뭐래? 같이 하면 돼. 같이 하면 돼. Thank you.
You were so wonderful. Really, you were great. I've already got one. Oh, I forget. Thank you so much.